Welcome to Jacked Up Politics, interview with Senator Jerry Buttimer, Cathairloach of Seanad, Eireann. In the studio with us today, you have myself, Jack, a second-year government and political science student. Also in the studio with me is Tom Dunn, a history and politics student here in UCC as well. And joining us for the first time, for our first ever interview, Senator Jerry Buttimer, who we're delighted to bring to you now.
Thanks, guys. May the 4th be with you. As we're around that time of the year.
Yeah, we are.
And thank you for having me. And looking forward to the conversation, the chat about all these politics. And we're jacked up, even better again.
Definitely. So, Tom, we'll let you ask a few questions first. What we'll do then is I'll ask you a few questions then. All right?
Perfect.
Shall I call you Jerry or Senator?
Jerry sounds like
Jerry's great. All right, good. The first thing I'd like to ask you is how did you get involved in politics?
So in my case, there was always a family involvement. My late father was a member of Fine Gael, would have campaigned in the 60s and 70s and 80s for a variety of politicians, people like former Lord Mayor John Birmingham and Brian Birmingham, and then laterally for Peter Barry, Jim Cork, Hugh Coveney, Simon Coveney's father, and would have been involved in Fine Gael. And my late grandfather would have fought in the Civil War on the Collins side, and he would have had a very strong political inclination and commitment to Fine Gael. And then, ironically, my uncle and my dad's brother would have been involved in Fianna Fáil, and I would have had relations in both sides who would have been Fianna Fáil ministers in Ballokeefe and Tom Meany. So we came from a kind of a strong political background, predominantly a Fine Gael background. So in my case, it was, I suppose, the influence of my father, who would have always exhorted all of us to take an interest in public life, to take an interest in what was going on in our area and how we could, as citizens, improve the lives of each other. And that's primarily where I got my interest from. I was director of elections in the 2002 general election in Cork South Central, which saw Simon Coveney win a seat, and Deirdre Toon was defeated. But then in 2004, former Taoiseach Enda Kenny and Phil Hogan, who was the then director of policy and strategy for Fine Gael, asked me to run for the local elections for Cork City Council. So 20 years ago this year, I was elected first to Cork City Council for the South West Ward, and I had the privilege of being a member of the Oireachtas and Cork City Council for those 20 years.
That's good to hear. Now, you're currently Cathairloach of the Seanad. I want to ask you, what, in your view, makes the Seanad distinct from the Dáil?
Well, constitutionally it's very distinct in that we don't necessarily have to hold the executive to account, but we do have a smaller chamber by virtue of its composition in terms of the vocational panels, the Taoiseach's nominees and the 6 university seats. It is a different type of chamber insofar as that the level of debate, both at second stage and especially at committee and report stage, allows us to pass through legislation in a different way than perhaps would happen in the Dáil. And as a consequence, you have seen a lot of amendments to bills made. You've seen errors in bills pointed out. And you've seen where, for example, as a consequence of the debate in the Seanad, sometimes perhaps in a bill, the President will call the Council of State together to look at the constitutionality of a bill. So there's less adversarialness, even though that is probably changing a small bit. There is a better quality of debate. It's probably fair to say that in the Seanad, there's a more measured, less partisan, less political stance taken in some cases to legislation, which allows for a better exchange. I would say that, by way of conversation, that government of whatever hue perhaps should use the Seanad more to initiate legislation, whereby they would get a better feel for what the content or the sort of undertone of a legislation, the import of it could be.
Okay.
So I think that's something that government could do more of.
Fair enough. Now, Do you feel optimistic about Fine Gael's chances in the local elections and in any upcoming general election?
Well, if you look at the opinion polls, then as a barometer, they would suggest that there would be a rise in independence Sinn Féin from the last local or from the last general election. That's to be, I suppose, to be seen in terms of the outcome of the results. There's definitely a conversation happening about change, but what does change mean? How does it manifest itself? What do people want? It is another question that perhaps we need to look at in the context of where we're going. I think the difficulty for the Fine Gael party at the moment is that they have been in government since 2011. People see the same people. They probably look at others with a kind of a freshness, even though that's not necessarily the case. And they perhaps have this wonderful sentiment about we'd like change. But when you distill it down, what does change mean? How does it represent itself? And where do people exercise their vote in terms of who do they vote for? It's a bit like, day and night, which is going to happen.
Yeah.
So,
do you consider the whole thing of change a politically vague idea, so in some ways?
It's a wonderful catchphrase that we all use from time to time and have used. What it means is a great question, because change is about policy rather than personnel. And if personnel, are we saying that politics becomes about personalities and therefore not policy? So that's the question we have to look at, because ultimately, I suppose the world in this year is going to have the greatest number of elections ever. President Biden uses the phrase a lot, which I actually agree with him on. In many cases, democracy is on the ballot in terms of what you put in to replace what you take out.
Yeah.
And we've seen in some places that experiment hasn't worked well and people have moved back. So it remains to be seen here what happens. We still have, I think it's 33 or 34 days to the local European elections. But I think it's important that people vote no matter what way they vote.
Fair enough. I'd like to move on to something slightly different and talk a bit about defence policy, if I might. So, there's been a lot of debate about Ireland's defence and security policy over the last few months and years, and not unreasonably when you consider, I think Leo Varadkar put it, there are dark clouds on Europe's horizons. So, do you feel that some tenets of Irish security policy, such as the triple lock and the policy of neutrality, might be subject to being altered over the next few years?
Well, not trying to evade your answer, but as the Cathairloach and Seanad, I can't stray too much into policy.
Yeah, that's fair enough, yeah.
But I do think that in a world that is changing, and we've seen our support of Ukraine, we've seen how we have taken a stance around Palestine with a two-state solution, and we've used our position in the UN Security Council, I think, to great effect to be a agent of both stability, peace, neutrality. But then the question I would reply back to, not trying to evade your
no, yeah, I understand completely,
is that our strict neutrality position has evolved and changed. Our engagement in peacekeeping around the world has obviously stood our country and our defence forces in huge stead. Micheál Martin has held a series of meetings, including one here on this campus, around our defence policy. So I think the important point is that we do remain an honest broker in the world. We do remain a neutral within that tenet of neutrality, where we can be seen to be the go-to country to help broker negotiations. But I think our sense of neutrality that was fashioned in World War II to now has definitely changed.
Yeah.
But I don't want to stray too much into policy, because that's a matter for government that will come before us, and I don't want to be seen to give an opinion. But the point you make is well intent that we are and we have changed as a country around our military involvement, being part of the European Union, while still being a strictly neutral state.
Fair enough, yeah.
So, you're the Cathairloach of the Seanad. Would you like to talk us through a week of what being the Cathairloach means? Because I know our listeners would love to hear what being the head of the Seanad means, because I personally think it's a very interesting role in Irish politics.
Well, the role is divided into, I suppose, a number of parts. The first part is it's representational, so you're the figurehead, you're the ambassador, the representative of the Seanad as part of the Oireachtas. So therefore, for example, you meet with visiting delegations from, for example, last week met with former Speaker Nancy Pelosi. This week I'm meeting with the the Nigerian Speaker of the Nigerian Parliament. So you have the representational piece. Obviously tomorrow, Wednesday, we're going to Aberhill to commemorate 1916, so you'll be representing the Seanad there. Then there's the piece around the legislative part of our job, which is legislation comes into the House, members will put forward amendments to different bills, and you have to make a ruling on the legality, whether they're in order or not. And that's an interesting part, because obviously members have great interest in legislation, and they're motivated by making the bill in their eyes better for them, or towards their own political point of view. And that then means you must go through legislation with the clerk of the Seanad and see how that, if the amendment is in order, number 1, 2, is there a consequent knock-on effect? So a lot of amendments are ruled out because there's a charge to the state, which is an extraordinary, in a modern world, in a modern democracy, situation where if you propose an amendment, but because there's a charge to the state, then it's ruled out of order. And sometimes that can be a bit controversial, because a lot of amendments are very well intent. The content of the amendment is actually quite good, but then you have to look at it through the lens of, is it constitutional? The other part then is you chair the proceedings of the House, which means that you are in the chair for the order of business, which is an opportunity for members every day to raise a matter of national, local, international importance. You're then also in the presiding officer's position in terms of votes in the House. And then the final piece is you're part of the Oireachtas Commission, which is the running of Leinster House. So therefore you're in meetings discussing aspects of how you make the Oireachtas better on behalf of the member, on behalf of the citizen, and on behalf of the person who works there. So it's an interesting, varied job. Sometimes when people look at the Seanad chamber and they see very few members there, they should recall that, and they should remember that members are actually in meetings, representing people, articulating views, working on behalf of, and can't always be in the Seanad. So for me, the job is a potpourri of everything. It's a tremendous privilege, one that I probably didn't know would be as busy and as involved as it is, but it's one that I enjoy every day, and it's got a different challenge and a different opportunity every day.
Great.
Another question I had for you as well is in terms of Seanad reform, because currently you have senators that are elected from the universities, you have senators that are voted onto the Labour panel, the Taoiseach picks a few, and I think also the President picks a few.
No, President picks none.
Oh.
No, 11 from the Taoiseach.
11 from the Taoiseach, yeah. So, in terms of Seanad reform, would you like to see, say, people being able to elect people to the Seanad from, say, the general public, like they do in America, for instance?
Yeah, we've had I think over 20 reports on Seanad reform. We had one recently which was chaired by Senator Michael McDougall, which will come before will be before government. And again, I don't want to stray into policy, but I think the Seanad referendum, which was defeated, signalled an intent and a desire of the public to have change and to have reform. I think there is an element that should be kept of the public representatives and councils voting. The wider public, the franchise should be extended to the wider public. And I'm not against that. I think it's how you marry all of the pieces to the jigsaw that is Seanad reform and put together a saleable, constitutional new Seanad. The difficulty we have is that in some cases, some of the reform proposed requires a constitutional referendum, which could ultimately be beaten, but it may not be. So I think we need to look at how, one, what we propose, two, the cost, which will of course be a factor for some people, and then thirdly, how do we make the Seanad relevant again to the people. I think the bicameral system works well. I'm a big proponent of a bicameral system. I think our democracy is better because of it, not because I'm a part of it, but because I think it is necessary to have the checks and balances that we've seen in the Dáil gets missed, and comes into the Seanad and gets picked up on. So I think that's part of what's good about the Seanad. So I think the whole idea of reform is one that we need to grapple with again, settle on a type of reform we want, and then move forward. But the question is, in putting reform together, we have to recognise we'll never keep everybody happy, and we won't get unanimity on what comes up.
Yeah, that's fair. Tom, you had another question there.
Yeah, I'd just like to ask you about maybe the evolution of the Fine Gael party, if I may now. Gareth Fitzgerald was well known as someone who kind of would have supported James Dillon's Just Society document. But I suppose Leo Varadkar, maybe by a level of contrast, he became well known by that catchphrase, he wanted a party for people who got up early in the morning. Do you think Fine Gael's ideology has changed over the years?
I think the fundamental principles and the tenet of Fine Gael has remained the same. How we communicate that core message of the Just Society from John A. Costello or Declan Costello to now is a great question. I think if you look at what we've done as a party in terms of our political ideology, we probably moved more left of centre in recent times than where we had been under, with perhaps say Liam Cosgrave, John Bruton, Alan Dukes was there for probably too short a time, Michael Noonan. So we've become a middle ground party resonating with a certain group, which to me, I suppose, as somebody who's left of centre within Fine Gael, it would be something that we need to, I suppose, represent all of the people. But if you look at us as a political party, we have been there since we helped found the state, the key institutions of the state, the key organisations of the state, to a new modern Ireland emanating, coming out of a recession, a COVID-19, which rocked the world. So I think we have changed, but at the same time, the core principles of a just society remain the same.
Okay.
Now, as we know, there has been a big uptake in far-right protests across the country. And recently enough, Simon Harris's house was the subject of a protest by so-called far-right individuals. Do you think that there needs to be more done for the security of members of the Oireachtas and members of, say, the cabinet as well, to make sure that they're protected at all times and that it doesn't become back to a stage where it was in the Troubles, where you had attempts being made on members of the Oireachtas by members of paramilitary organisations? Do you think that we could see those groups getting that bad if we don't implement security measures to protect the members of the Oireachtas?
First of all, the potential exists, and we need to take that seriously. We saw with the riots outside Dublin, or outside the Leinster House at the beginning of the new Dáil term last autumn. We saw with Dublin riots. There has been an escalation in projected potential attacks on members of government. You see with Helen McEntee, we said protests at the Taoiseach's house. So as part of that threat and the rise of intimidation against members of the Oireachtas to Ceann Comhairle, and I established the political task force on participation in public life, which is chaired by former Garda Commissioner Noreen O'Sullivan. That report is imminent, and we look forward to that report being published and the content of that report, which we will have to reflect upon. So the answer to your question is that we've seen in England where we've had 2 members of the Parliament killed. We've seen attacks on members of the House of Congress in the United States and other parliamentary democracies. So we have to take it seriously. Secondly, the right to protest is one that we all have and shouldn't be taken away from us. But that's not an unfettered right. There's a responsibility with that. That if you breach, then there should be a consequence of. What we saw at the house of Roger O'Gorman, what we've seen at the house of the Taoiseach is unacceptable. But it's not new. Like we've always had protests in Ireland. So we've had mass mobilisation of people around particular issues over time, and they've been largely in the public domain in terms of on the public thoroughfare, i.e. farmers' protest or PAYE marches or marches against the closure of a particular hospital, or we've seen in recent times the march of people against what's happening in Gaza for the Palestinian people. And they're legitimate protests that haven't transcended any of the norms of society. So what's happening in terms of the protests at politicians' homes, I think is unacceptable. There is a need for the Garda Commissioner to utilise the existing Public Order Act. I know my colleague Senator Malcolm Byrne has a bill before the House in terms of protection of the right not to protest outside the homes of politicians, and that's not a diminution of the right of people to protest. Far from it. Look, I had an office not close to here. We had people protesting over a variety of issues over periods of time. That's their right. If you are endangering or targeting a specific politician or politicians, then that's unacceptable. And there are other means to protest rather than at the homes, where in the case of a Taoiseach, there were young children going to bed, which I think is unacceptable. But no matter what the politicians, whether it's anyone from the left or the right, there should be no, protest at the home of politics. That should be sacrosanct.
Yeah. Now, I know myself, I'm quite interested in getting involved in politics myself. So what would your advice be for someone like myself or Tom who'd be interested in getting into politics but are worried about the potential fallout of these extremist individuals, potentially discouraging someone like myself or Tom from getting involved in politics?
I would always encourage people who have an interest to get involved. It's a wonderful way of making your community, your city, your country a better place. We need democracy relies upon the citizen to be a participant through the ballot box, but also through the political process. And it is a very small minority of people who are engaging in the practice of a negative type of politics in terms of the protest or as we see in modern times, putting a mobile phone up to a person's face and taking a video, which becomes the soundbite or the video clip to go on social media to get the click, to get the like, to get the reaction, to mobilise a certain cohort of people. I suppose we can't live life by social media, as we all know, and you're far more engaged in social media than I am. It's an echo chamber on Twitter. It isn't the real life. It isn't the real world. There's a very small number who are engaging in the behaviour. But by the same token, that type of behaviour needs to be called out by us as politicians and those of us who are involved in the democratic space. But it also needs to be acted upon by the social media companies. And it's, in the case of Twitter, a very toxic place. You could, if you were a very vulnerable person who is, upset by criticism, who perhaps doesn't see beyond the comment, a place where it's very dark. So for those of us who are hardened by politics and by social media, you tend not to now get too worked up about some of the comments. But it is something that needs to be, I think, addressed by the social media companies. Equally, I think politicians, by our language and how we present ourselves, both in the chamber, in political debate, is important. We are meant to be leaders, therefore our rhetoric and our words do matter. And there's a piece where we need to kind of dial down the rhetoric. Political charges are one thing, but making comments that are personal and close to the bone are also something that we need to call out as well.
Any more questions, Tom?
Yeah, I just have one more big one that I'd like to ask. Leo Varadkar, when he resigned, he mentioned that part of it was personal. Does a political career, I know we've just mentioned the positives, but does it take a toll on you?
It does, absolutely, at whatever level you're at. I mean, in my case, I suppose there's a number of parts to it. One is in coming out as gay as part of before the marriage equality referendum in 2012, to become part of the movement of change, had an impact on how some people would look at you. Secondly, the policy position or the decisions that government takes has an impact on how some people view you. And then thirdly, as a politician, you are constantly looking to engage, constantly looking to meet people and you put, in some cases, your family second because you go to an event, you go to a meeting, you go to a function, or you go canvassing, and then your family life is the second piece. So it does have a toll. In the case of Leo Varadkar being the Taoiseach, obviously, there comes a point in your life where you say, this is having a profound impact. And I'm only speculating in his case, because, he's at the front line. He's 24/7 living in that bubble. And the negativity and the constant barrage of criticism has to take a toll. But I think if you look at what Leo Varadkar did, it was a pure act of bravery to recognise that he had reached a point where he could give no more, where he was able to say to himself, I've done my bit, I need to hand the baton over, and he did. So to those of us in the second tier of public life, politics does take its toll, but by the same token, we are willing agents of being involved in that process. So it isn't, I wouldn't not get involved in politics. I have the same hunger and passion that I had 20 years ago to serve and to work, and I look forward to every day as a politician. There are challenges when you see people in difficulty around particular issues, when you see that they're struggling to get access to services, and your job is to try and help them and facilitate and work with them to do it. That has an impact. But at the same time, equally, when you make a decision as a government, or when you as a politician are part of a project that becomes successful, then that gives you a benefit and you say it's worthwhile. So I've still the same interest, the same engagement, the same hunger.
Well, final question for you is, where do you see yourself in 5 to 10 years' time? Do you see yourself still involved in politics? Do you see yourself retired, living on a sunny beach somewhere? Or do you see yourself getting involved in kind of lecturing in politics here in somewhere like UCC? Or where do you see yourself?
10 years' time I'll be 67, so I hope I'll be retired by then. In 5 years' time I would like to still be involved as part of the Oireachtas, because I think it is important that we get the balance between the younger generation, the middle, and those of us who are probably in the heading towards our 60s who have a contribution to make, and is that balance. So the answer is, in 5 years' time I certainly would like to be involved. 10 years I will probably be retired from public life, hoping to still be involved in some capacity, in some organisation, in some shape or form, helping to shape a better society and to make a life better for everybody. And that's still what motivates me, is that the essence of what we do as politicians is about representation of people. It's about advocating for different organisations, but also policy decisions to make life better for people.
Well, Senator, it has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very, very much for coming in today.
Thank
Folks,
you, guys.
That has been our interview with Senator Jerry Buttimer, the Cathairloach of Seanad, Eireann. We hope you've enjoyed the episode. This episode we'll be bringing to you won't actually be in 2 weeks' time. It'll actually be a bit quicker than that. It'll be going up on Saturday. And it'll be a special interview with some of the local election candidates for the Cove local electoral area for the 2024 local elections. We're looking forward to bringing you this special episode. We're hoping to have a bit more in depth with the candidates a bit after the election, as this one will just be a quick kind of get to know the candidates and kind of help people decide on what candidates they'd like to pick for the local area and who they would like to represent them in the next election. So until next time, lads, that is everything jacked up. We hope you've had a
to whoever may need this nugget of encouragement, things will be alright, so put your word. I get it, the odds seem stacked back against the wall, but even consider it such, no, you'll stand tall. Sat and watched from the sidelines, one too many times. Wicked games to play, make me wanna lose my mind. Found solitude, knowing it'll be over soon. Ever need a boost, count on me for the 1-2. Trouble don't last when the tough get going. Baby, all we do is win, so show me my opponent. Adversity